all. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Cami Sawyer, who's now with the Ministry of Education. She is going to talk to us about the opportunities arising from the review of NCEA. So I'm going to hand to Cami, stop sharing and give her the space to do so. Welcome, Cami, and welcome to everyone again.
Thank you. Welcome to everyone. Oops. Are you guys getting bad feedback? Or is it just me? So sorry, I have to click all the right buttons. Is my share happening now?
Yeah, it's all looking good, Cami.
Cami, we can see your presenter notes, not your slide.
That's not what's supposed to be happening. Should have tested this out.
So
how do I tell it not to do notes?
when you go to maybe go back to share screen and, oh, no, I don't know. You've got two screens going?
I do.
Yeah. So you might need to pick
them
the
all
other
on
screen.
one. Yeah, put them all on one screen maybe. So sorry if I'm not looking. I'm really sorry about this, you guys. I thought I had it all working.
Just take your time. There's no panic.
If you go to share screen, if you've already have the PowerPoint going, you can select a specific window and you can select just the window that has your presentation, and then you can have your presentation notes. There you go, on the other side.
Not doing it? Okay, thank you. So, kia ora, Nor America oku tipuna, ke papaioia o e noho ana, ko Cami Sawyer tene. This is about opportunities arising from NCEA, and as Pip said, I'm Cami, and I'm newly at the Ministry of Education, so there's probably lots of questions you might have about that I probably can't answer, but I can pass things on if you have them. As we go, if you have questions, Ann and Pip are going to be watching the chat, and if you have questions that they feel like I should answer at that moment, Pip and feel free to interrupt and come in and ask the question. Otherwise, we'll save them all till the end. But if there's something that just feels like it'd be better to clear up when I'm on that slide, that makes sense too. So I'm planning on talking about the NCEA changes and opportunities I see coming from that, and really focusing in on the learning matrix. So the government's vision for NCEA is that we're going to enhance focus on teaching and learning and thinking. And so when you're planning your curriculum, you're planning your courses for next year, you're thinking about that focus on teaching and learning rather than focus on the assessment. Explicitly valuing Te Ao Maori and Mātauranga Maori, and the ministry is working at providing resources for that. The talk that was just held by Tony and Piata, I don't know how many of you had a chance to see that, but if you didn't, I'd encourage you to go watch the video when it's available. That was very useful and interesting. And there's opportunities coming up at the NZAMP conference in October. And the third one is enabling all Akanga to successfully transition from school into further study, training, employment, and life beyond school. So really explicitly thinking about pathways. So all the changes have been tested against these guiding principles: the well-being, equity, inclusion, coherence, pathways, and credibility. And I think it's a really good idea to keep those 5 guiding principles in mind when you're planning your courses and thinking about, what does this look like for your students? And can I make any of these more explicit? As most of you are probably well aware of now, the 7 changes, making NCEA more accessible, mana orite mo te Mātauranga Maori, fewer larger standards, strengthening literacy and numeracy, simplifying NCEA structure, clear pathways, again, that pathway, and keeping NCEA level 1 as an optional level. The review of achievement standards is happening in both Te Maratanga o Aotearoa and the New Zealand curriculum. But in this talk, I'm going to be talking as it focuses on the New Zealand curriculum. You may be aware that in February, it was announced that there would also be a curriculum refresh, and might be interested or curious about how that fits together. Maths and stats is one of the first ones that's happening after history, which has happened this year. So maths and stats refresh is going to be happening next year. So it's not all the curriculum areas at the same time, it's rolling out, but we are the second one up, or one of the second ones up. The review of achievement standards process has been built on the same design principles that the curriculum refresh is following. So some big ideas of what mathematics and statistics are about were formatted, and those big ideas are being given to both groups, and both groups are looking at that in that curriculum refresh. So there's ongoing communications between both groups. The focus of the curriculum refresh and those big ideas is really coming from those essence statements. That's that front part of the curriculums for maths and stats, but also the other stuff that's in that front part of the curriculum. You haven't read the essence statements for maths and stats in a while, I'd encourage you to do that. And again, to think about building those ideas into your courses. Talks about what is maths and stats about, why study maths and stats, and then the part you're probably familiar with is how our learning area is structured, the number algebra, geometry measurement, and statistics and probability. And so that's what we see in the back half being aligned with our AOs. One of the other things that's part of that front half, our essence statement, is our whakatoki. Ke hopu toringa ke te aka taipa ingari kia maua te aka matua. And if you think about what that means, what does that tell us about the subject? It's really interesting to explore how you analyze that, how that might affect your teaching of mathematics and statistics. Maths advisor that I admire, John Hogan, has a blog about this. And if you just Google our whakatoki, it's the first site that comes up, or one of the first ones that comes up. And he discusses how he's thought about this as a metaphor for teaching mathematics and focusing in on the big picture rather than the interesting little sidetracks, and making sure students are seeing the big picture. And I think a lot of what we're looking at in our learning matrix is that idea. And I'll just read the end part of this quote from Jim. It is through mathematics we help make great citizens. It is the front end of the curriculum that is actually most important. And as a math teacher, or as math teachers, we develop all this in the context of mathematics and statistics. So that whole entire front end of the curriculum, and looking at that in terms of maths and stats. One of the big priorities is Mana Orite mo te Mataranga Maori. And there's lots of questions about that, lots of learning that all of us still have to do. But I thought this visual gave a really nice way of thinking about it and looking at it. Mataranga is knowledge, wisdom, understanding, skills in general. It's the Maori word meaning knowledge. But when we say Mataranga Maori, it's that knowledge from a Maori perspective. And you might know that lots of Maori don't see themselves as one monolith, that what's probably more important is Mataranga a iwi, and the knowledge from your particular area. And that's why we really encourage you to work with your local iwi, to talk to the local iwi hapus and the whānau of your school. So then we have also Mataranga a whānau, and looking and seeing what are the traditional knowledges? What are the knowledges of each family? And you can do that cross-culturally. The focus on Mātauranga Maori is because of Heteriti Waitangi. We honor that, we support that. We are a bicultural nation, and students in any classroom in New Zealand should know that they're part of that bicultural country. But we also bring lots of other cultures into that. And so my accent, yeah, I'm bringing other ideas, other cultures, other ways we celebrate. So you might talk to your class, have students talk about, what are their favorite foods that they have to celebrate at a feast or a special day, a birthday in their family. And that's when you're going to really see that Mātauranga a whānau. We see that huge variation. And it's just important to remember, no tororo, naku tororo, ka ora ai te iwi. Your contributions, my contributions, and then the wealth and health of us all is sustained. We have to work together. And that's what's so lovely about this AMA Day and NZC conference, is we get that chance to come together and share that from across schools, but then also in your classroom with your students, valuing their contributions and who they are, not depersonalizing and saying, oh, maths is something that's outside of them, but making it part of them. So the review of achievement standards, the SEGs, the groups that have been engaged, consisting of teachers and people from pathways, thinking about where it's going to go, and some university people all work together, and they formatted a lot of this so far. We're not all the way down the line. They provided the learning matrix, the assessment matrix, course outlines, achievement standards, internal assessment activities, and external assessment briefs. That's what hopefully you've been looking at this week or this month, and it's been available on the ncea.education.gov.nz website. Still to come are teaching, learning, and assessment guides. In all of this, we're thinking about hoping to build towards that idea of mana orite. We don't think we're there yet. It is a goal. And we have to start by respecting and placing Mātauranga Maori within these things. And we've done our best at doing that. As I said, I wanted to focus a little bit more today on the learning matrix. So the learning matrix, as hopefully you've seen, I know you can't read the details here, so it's available to download from that website. Across the top, we have the process big ideas. Down the side, we have the knowledge big ideas. And those are the key ideas about how we work and understand mathematics and statistics. And in the middle, we have the significant learning. And it's categorized under those topics we're used to: number and algebra, geometry and measurement, statistics and probability. But it's also given with cross strands with saying, how does algebra apply with other topic areas such as measurement? We're trying to create that focus. If we look more at the big ideas, we'll see why. So I've reduced the big ideas to one word each, and then we'll break them down. So wānanga, haidinga korero, wānanga are the process big ideas, and then we have knowledge big ideas, representation, patterns, and uses. So let's look at and break down those. First, I'm going to look at the process big ideas. Again, my American accent, I couldn't decide if they were process big ideas or process big ideas, but I think most of you guys would say process, so I'm going with that. So we want to talk about hononga, taringa korero, and wānanga. Hononga, what is that? That's the whole notion that we want students to be creating connections. We've seen over the past review of achievement standards and how the achievement standards had started driving the curriculum is that learning and teaching became very disparate, and very few connections were being explicitly made or had students helped with them making those explicit connections. And we know it's through making those connections is how students will see the subject is useful to their lives and get more interested in studying it. So when we think about making those connections, putting those puzzle pieces together, if you want, you can think about it as a many-sided thing. There's a lot of connections that can be made. It's not just within the strands or across the strands, but we want them making those, within the different topics in algebra they're learning and across number and algebra and geometry. But it's also making connections to their future and their past or the subject's past. Seeing mathematics as something that is humanly created, mathematics and statistics, it's humanly created, bringing in some history into the teaching of mathematics helps students create those connections and understand why we learn it and where it came from. As always, creating those connections to the real world, to their pathways, what they might want to do, but also understanding that at this point of their life, there's a lot of pathways still open to them and they should keep them open and not restrict themselves, and to the other stuff that they're studying and interested in. So, I mean, we could add more puzzle pieces. You can make connections to their sports, to their whānau, to their iwi. So creating connections, wānanga. Taringa korero. How I see this and think about this is creating and working like a mathematician or a statistician. Those two careers, mathematicians and statisticians, work slightly differently. But both of them take information, look at either data or equations or something in the world around them, and they create and work on with that. So taringa korero that's what we're wanting to encourage students to do. Literally, taringa korero is a statement believed to be true based on observations. So this is just a clip off of a YouTube video where somebody is making those observations. They're summing up the odd numbers, and they're noticing when they sum the odd numbers that they're getting perfect squares. So they make a conjecture about it. That's literally what taringa korero is. But in general, we can think it's about making sense of what they're learning, making those connections, coming up with their own ideas and testing them to see if they're true. If you're interested in reading teacher blogs, this numberstrings.com had a nice teacher blog on why conjectures matter, probably aimed more at year 9 and 10 junior school or intermediate school, but it shows that these aren't high level ideas necessarily. They can be, but we can pull them into the classroom, and you can start doing that with your junior school. Another place where you've already seen taringa korero is, I know most of us in our stats teaching use that I notice, I wonder about what's going on with the data. The idea is we want to be encouraging students to do that with their mathematics as well, not just following rules or ways we've told them to happen, but thinking about how to make sense out of it, working, creating like a mathematician. I notice, I wonder is a great way to do that. Wānanga. Wānanga is about creating discussions, either as a whole class, small groups, pairs, or even that talk that we have in our head. Wānanga doesn't have to be out loud, but it has that notion that we're creating and thinking about stuff with other people. And I like the definition of wānanga that says it's those discussions for a purpose. We're not just korero, it's not just talking, but we're doing it for a reason. And talk moves, if you haven't seen it, it's something you can Google, and there's not lots of information, nice posters about it. But talk moves gives a nice way of thinking about how to bring wānanga into the classroom. So there's 7 pieces of this pie, and you could look and see this is just another poster I found online, thinking about wait time. We talk a lot about wait time in our classroom, in our teaching, waiting, giving students time to think, but also if you're putting them think, pair, share, or small groups, you can ask them to give each other wait time, pause before discussing it so they have a chance to develop their own thinking. Turn and talk, that's part of that think, pair, share. Adding on, giving students the language to say, so you could say, would anyone else like to add something on? But what about the student saying, oh, I hear what you're saying and I'd like to add on this. So giving students that language, and so even in their small groups or their pairs, they can do that. Asking them to revoice what they hear others saying. Asking them to explain their reasoning. Again, that's part of that Taringa Correro, the creating, thinking, explaining your reasoning, building that together to come up with your mathematical or statistical ideas. Repeating what you hear somebody else say so they can make sure that it's what they meant, that you're hearing what they meant. It's a little like revoicing, but can be a little bit different as well. You can allow somebody else to take on another person's perspective and revise your thinking. So you start at one place. Hopefully students aren't all staying at that place. The point of wānanga, true wānanga, where you're listening and learning from other people, is not to say, I know I'm right and I'm sticking there, but listen and build from there. This is also another place where it's an easy place to bring some te reo in your classroom if you want. Again, people have made posters out there. So, ki toku ne whakaaro. What are your thoughts on this? You can bring that into the classroom if that's something you want. So those are the three big ideas that the group saw in terms of learning mathematics, process big ideas, wānanga, creating those connections, Taringa Correro, working, thinking like a mathematician or statistician, and wānanga, having those productive discussions to help the learning, help cement the learning, help the reasoning, building their understanding of mathematics and statistics. So now let's look at the knowledge big ideas, the part that went down the side. So I broke those down into 3 words: representations, patterns, and uses. So let's look at each of those. Multiple representations. This, again, we're trying to bring back that connection that's went missing possibly a little bit as the mathematics got more siloed in the secondary school. But this is something you're probably very familiar with, is doing multiple representations, making sure students are making those connections between the equation, table, graph, also to worded problems, taking worded problems, application problems, although sometimes, they're not true real life problems, but they're phrased in mathematical ways to come into the classroom a little bit easier, and making those connections to the table, equations, graphs. We know that has been something really important. We've seen that in our assessments over the last 10 years or so, and that's going to continue to be important. We can also, representations, seeing different ways to think about, say, linear functions, and, we could make a graph from them and interpret that graph, but also, function notation, that doesn't really come in until level 2 to NCEA level 2, but we can start helping students see that there's different ways to write the equations of lines. Up here, it was written as A equals 10 plus 2h, making those variables make sense to the situation. And here we're using X and Y's and helping students make sense of those. So multiple representations, multiple ways of representing things, helping students make sense, make those connections. Patterns. These are the kind of patterns that we've become used to. Patterns where we can look and finding the border of that and saying how many blocks are in the border, we can do it as number, we can do equations. That multiple representations again of different ways of representing those equations, that there's just not one right equation. And of course, we've done in our classrooms, we would take that and extend that and start possibly with simpler and extend up to this pattern and have different students come up with their equations and look at how those fit together. So patterns like that is something that we've been doing a long time in algebra, and we should continue to do, helping students make those connections between the number and the algebra and seeing the pattern. But many people say mathematics is the science of patterns. Everything about mathematics is patterns. So we don't want to just stick to this kind of patterns. We want to think more broadly. What else can we think of as patterns? So for instance, patterns in trig. Perhaps you already do this with your year 10 class, actually giving them triangles that sit within other triangles, measuring sides and, finding the ratios of two of those sides and doing it for the smaller triangle and then the smaller triangle and noticing that those ratios are always the same. And doing it for all the different ways you can do those ratios. And then talk about why would we give those ratios names. And maybe here we've done it with a particular angle, change the angle. Technology is beautiful here because it allows us to do that and allows us to see that those ratios will not stay the same when we change the angle, but they'll still stay the same between each other. So again, wānanga, making those connections. And of course, lots of other patterns in nature, looking at the golden ratio or Fibonacci, but seeing patterns in everything they see, recursive patterns, all sorts of patterns. A lot of mathematics is discovered by people noticing patterns and then saying, well, can I generalize that? So seeing mathematics as the science of patterns. The last but not least is uses of mathematics and statistics. So explore, solve, model problems. That's how we use mathematics and statistics. We can see here in this head lots of the links to science or futures or just connecting stuff, puzzling out things, or athletics. They can see mathematics. We want them to be able to see mathematics and statistics in all their parts of their lives. The statistics there, the technology, we want them bringing those together and see that maths and stats is useful. So again, possibly through bringing in some history, historical problems, not just through application problems, but making those connections. And, it doesn't have to be, as I was saying, just practical, but we can do thought experiments with mathematics, like using the parable about getting 1 grain of rice the first day and doubling that every day, and then looking at how much rice would that be in the long run, seeing that exponential growth from starting from a practical and then extending on to build the notion of exponents and connecting that to COVID and other things. So seeing that mathematics is useful in their lives. So there's knowledge, big ideas, representations, patterns, uses. So putting those all back on the learning matrix. Those are the big things we want happening in our classroom all the time: the wānanga, taringa, karero, wānanga, representations, patterns, uses. And then in the middle, we have the significant learning. The stuff that's too important not to be left to chance. And it's designed to show how the strands are fit together. So the idea is that this learning matrix has been created for you to help plan your courses. So it's there for you. And of course, we're in the feedback process and all of this. So if there's things on there that shouldn't be there, you don't think that was too important to be missed, we've gotten some feedback about that. Or if there's things that are really important that we've left out. We need to know that so we can make those changes. So why is this way of thinking about mathematics and statistics? Why do I find it so important? We go back to those key ideas that the ministry based all the changes on. Well-being is one of the key ones. Very key to all of us, I think, right now. We're thinking about our students' well-beings, their whānau, the larger community, the whole country. In terms of maths and statistics, it's worrying how much maths anxiety there is in New Zealand. There's been quite a bit of research showing that we have quite high levels of maths anxiety. I went to an online webinar by the Global Math Department a few years ago and went to her Casey Allen's presentation on how mathematics anxiety can be reduced. And I took this screen capture. She talked about all of these things, but in the end, she was saying we have to end these traumatizing traditions that contribute to boredom and negativity, as well as feelings of failure and inadequacy. We need our year 11 students coming out of year 11 feeling confident in math, feeling like they are able to do something, feeling connected to it, feeling like it's important to their lives. So how can we do that? What are those things? So we claim those big ideas should help in this. So if we look at these traditions we should end, and I restate them in positive ways, we should be grouping, but grouping mixed ability, having that wānanga in our classrooms. To measure understanding, we should be looking at wānanga. How many connections are they making? How are they understanding, looking at it from a bigger point of view? We want collaboration. Again, that wānanga, mathematical discourse. We want students to all come out thinking like a mathematician or a statistician. You know, how do they approach this world? If they have questions about something, could they go gather the data and try to answer that question using data or building a model and using equations? We want them thinking like and creating like mathematicians and statisticians. We want them solving problems and thinking. Really, this one here, I could have put pretty much all of them. We want them looking at what patterns are created. We want them building those connections, that wānanga again. We want them working like mathematicians and statisticians, the Taringa Korero. I could have put that one on for, I could have put all 6 of them there on that one. And for the next one, we want them doing that sound reasoning. How do we practice reasoning? How do we see if our reasoning makes sense or work on improving that? Again, the wānanga gives us a way to do that. And realizing there are multiple pathways. We saw that with those patterns earlier. Different students could get different equations. There's not one right way to do it. Realizing there's multiple representations, maybe they think of it in a completely different way. And again, that one we could really put all of those again, and we see those big ideas recurring over and over. So if I think about our learning matrix, I really think about changing the way we're teaching to create better well-being for our students, to help them be happier citizens who can use maths and stats. Probably have also spent some time looking at the draft standards. Here, I'm just going to check the time. Okay, we're still doing okay. There's the 4 draft standards, the 2 internals and 2 externals. 1.1 is focused on the statistical inquiry cycle and having students create data, use data, explore data, understanding that whole process. 1.2 is about doing Taringa Korero on mathematics. Look, explore mathematical problems. I've been following Bernie Wills. I don't know how many of you guys have been looking at what he's doing at the schools in Wellington and creating classes where his students are creating their own assessments based on what they've been learning. And I really see that happening here with this 1.2, allowing students to, they're a dancer and they have a question that's mathematically related to their dancing, or, they really are interested in, maybe they want to go work for Rocket Labs or something, and they're interested in that. Could they write their own task and show how they're creating their futures or their current lives in terms of creating a task that's interesting to them that they explore? So that's kind of where I'm hoping that goes in the end. You'll see that that's not what our example standards look like, because the examples have to be piloted by the schools next year. But after that, you're going to have a lot more choice. The two external standards: interpret and apply mathematical and statistical information. 1.3 is just so important because the majority of us who aren't math teachers, okay, so none of the people in this room, but outside the people who are not maths and stats teachers, the majority of people who use maths and stats are using information that's given to them and needing to put a critical brain around that and think about how to critically interpret that maths and statistics. We've seen that hugely with the coronavirus, how people understand or believe things that are presented to them, whether they go research it and check that out or just believe what they were shown. We see with statistics all the time, graphs that are misleading, information that's misleading, using the baseline numbers. I heard one the other day about something like 63% of people in Iceland who are being diagnosed with coronavirus are vaccinated. And that might sound scary to you until you realize that 71% of their population is vaccinated. And if you look at the percentages of the unvaccinated, that you're 3 times as likely to catch coronavirus if you're unvaccinated than if you're vaccinated. So it's important that we're looking at those baseline numbers and understanding how to evaluate that. And so working with that with our students is going to be really important. And that's what 1.3 is going to assess. And oops, I can see a typo here. Sorry. That one should have said 1.4, demonstrate mathematical reasoning. This is the end of the year external and is probably a more traditional maths type exam where they get a chance to, just in mathematical context, not contrived extra context, show their understanding of geometry and trig and blanking. I think right now there's number on there. Several of you pointed out that probability is listed on one part and not in another part. So there's some thinking that has to be done around that one a little bit. You'll notice that, that 1.4 is kind of a traditional exam, and that 1.3 was set up as a common assessment activity. The ministry did work with NZQA to get more options for what the kind of external assessments we could have. And the SEG felt like they heard from teachers that they didn't really want to do portfolios, that would be too time consuming and hard. But we're not excluding you in your internal assessments doing it through a portfolio. So these were options for the externals, and you could explore other ones. Back to that Mātauranga Maori, how are we bringing that in? You will see in the assessment activities that one assessment activity per internal had an explicit Maori focus. So, and so you might want to look at those explicitly. If you just attended Tony and Kiata's presentation on Pūrako, we actually have one that uses Pūrako, the Pūrako of Maui slowing down the sun. So you can look at those. We are in this process. Phase 2 is finished. We are now waiting for feedback from you. There's not a lot of time to get feedback. It's actually, the survey closes on Monday. So if you've looked at the products, if you have things to say about them, things you want changed, things you like, we'd love to hear some positive feedback. But regardless, any feedback you have, please provide that. Please go to the website here and have your say. There is another teacher-only day coming up, and that's focusing on taking that learning matrix that we spent so much time on and turning that into what is that going to look like for my class, my students, possibly talking to your local iwi, talking to your parents of your school, finding out what they want to see for their students. There is this new phono toolkit, if you haven't seen it, it's at parents.education.gov.nz, and the networks of expertise can also provide. So if there's things that you're going, oh, I'm really going to need help with this, and we know Mātauranga Māori is one of those for all of us, then please go to those sources and ask for that. And especially, I strongly encourage you to go to the conference, the NCEA conference in Taranaki in October. Quite a few of the talks there going to be around Mātauranga Māori, including I'm doing one with Tania Tamaro of Massey University, and we'll be talking about what makes things Mātauranga Māori, what and what's not. And she has some really nice research around that we'll be looking at and discussing. So, yep, I have more things we could discuss, but I am out of time. So I'll stop there and get to let me know what are your questions and how I can answer them.
So Kemi, at the moment it's very quiet in the chat. So I was just wondering if it was okay for you if we opened it up, but if people had a question, if they unmute themselves and ask the question, that would be great. That might be the most efficient way for now. Otherwise, silence, we will assume people have got lots to think about and go away and contemplate as they're preparing their responses tomorrow.
Hi, sorry. I think you already mentioned it, but just in case you didn't, you mentioned that people had raised the probability concern with you. Like one of the course outlines that was on the NCEA site had it under the 1.3 exam, and then one had it under the 1.4 exam. So it's just, yeah, there's a little bit of clarity around that, sorry. But I know you did mention it.
Yeah, so it got mentioned, it's got put at two different places under the 1.4, and it's not under the explanatory notes. And so the SEG group is going to have to look back at that and see if they want probability in there. That would be the theoretical probability, because the 1.4 exam is more focused on those mathematical methods. But students also might be, so it's probably under 1.1 is the other place where probability might come up, is under doing experimental probability, theoretical probability. And one of the sample activities, the one around games, is the idea that you could gather your data through experimental probability and explore it that way. So, I mean, probability kind of has those two different, it's more mathematical view and it's more statistical view. And so it is one of those places. It's not the other place right now.
Okay, yeah, I guess my question was, just around, like, so for example, two-way tables and things like that, which have traditionally been in the statistics external, if they would be staying in that 1.3 kind of external, which seems to be like a stats external, but not really, or if that would be more in the 1.4, but yeah.
Yeah, the two-way tables looking at conditional probability through tables or understand. So that 1.3 is really about, looking at information presenting to that and to students and interpreting that. And so, yes, I do think that two-way tables could fit under that as well. Thanks for pointing that out.
Kemi, there's a question here about looking forward to level 2 and 3. Can we hope for the same 6 key ideas for level 2 and 3 standards? And do you think we might see a bigger focus on mathematical modelling in the higher levels too?
That is the hope that we're going to see a bigger focus on mathematical modeling. It is, I mean, because we know mathematical modeling is a whole process on its own, and, is hard for students to get their head around. I mean, it will be something that will be given as an option for those SEG groups. I can't predict what they're going to come up with. And the other part of the question, I feel like I didn't answer it all.
So can we hope to see the same 6 key ideas for level 2 and 3 standards? I'm assuming they're talking about the learning matrix, the 6 things that we went through today.
The level 1 seg group will pass those on, kind of as gift those up to the level 2 and 3 groups, and then they'll make and those groups will also have those big essence ideas, the big ideas that came out of the first half of the curriculum. And so they'll decide whether or not those 6 were enough for them, or they need more or less. So yeah, that to be determined. But
and we don't know for sure because we haven't had the subjects confirmed, but at level 2 we have got 2 subjects versus the 1 subject, which if people aren't aware suggests there'll be 2 segs as opposed to 1. Is that a fair assumption from that?
I think from the ministry material, it looks like, the assumption was that there would be 2 subjects at level 2. And then that all is still up to approval by the education minister.
So there's a question here for you, Cami. So it's not the same seg groups going through. So there's probably a little bit of clarification around them.
There's overlap in the groups. There's some of them, but because there was just 1 seg group for level 1, and then the understanding is that there will be 2 waiting on confirmation from the minister at level 2, and possibly up to 3 at level 3. So there would be people from the level 1 going into those groups, but there would be additional people joining.
Which answers the question, is there 3 at level 3? So
we don't know yet.
Yeah, we don't know.
And it's not just, I'd like to say, I really don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not just pretending I don't know. The consultation only closed a week ago Friday, and we have not heard back. I'm not even sure they've sent forward a proposal to the minister yet, and we definitely haven't heard back from the minister, who might be a little busy doing other things right now.
Cami, I would like to share a screen again, but just as we're doing the swap over, I just want to really thank you for being prepared to come and talk to us. As you know, in the past, one of the purposes of the Saturday morning get-togethers for teachers was to give them opportunities to be participating in the latest things that are happening in our subject area and to learn about what amazing things other people are doing. So the session this morning, I think, is really critical for all of us as we're looking forward to what is going to be potential changes for our students in Year 11 in 2023, but also will impact on things we might do next year with our Year 10 students, and certainly gives us food for thought. So thank you very much.